basic thing on paint, and I'm going to try to keep it a little more condensed. For those of you that were here last month, I guess it would be now, for the bodywork one, that was great, but I'll try to make it so it's a little shorter. Keyword is try. And again, I'm going to try to cover just the basics. We're going to do a custom paint class. I think it's the next one, right? That Tom will teach, where we'll get into a lot more of custom masking and custom paints and tricks that you can do with paint and all that kind of wild fun stuff. This is going to be more or less just what the products are, as far as primers, which we did touch on some of that on the bodywork class, but I'll revisit that briefly, and kind of go from after the bodywork and those primers and up to the paints and the different kinds of paints, and then we'll get into a little bit on just spraying, this technique, the differences in spray guns, and we're lucky enough today. I was going to have you guys just shoot some random paint on a fender or a door. That's the door that we had from the bodywork class. I don't know if you remember that. I just sanded it real quick. I was going to actually have you guys spray some base coat, which I still am set up to do. We'll spray some actual color, but we got some parts back from the sandblaster today, and I don't know if you remember, for those of you here for the bodywork one, that when we get the parts back from the sandblaster, we put them in that black epoxy primer. So I figured, what better to learn to spray on? So I'll actually have you guys spray some actual primer, some actual paint on some actual panels. And then I'm going to charge the customer for it. No, it's epoxy primer, it's the etching primer, and it's a kind of thing where you really can't screw it up. The only thing you could actually screw up is not putting enough on, and we can take care of that in the morning if that happens after the fact. If you get a run in it, it's not a big deal. It's going to get sanded down for body work and primer surfacer afterwards. So. The other part of that too is it's actually really good when they're bare metal like that. The epoxy primer that we're going to use is black, so when you can really see what you're putting on, so that it actually works really well as a guide to actual spray. So that's kind of what we're going to do. I'll start with just that, some of the primers. When we get those parts back from glass or whatever, we did touches on this on the bodywork class, there's a difference between primer / etching primer and primer surfacing. So primer is something that is strictly for adhesion and for corrosion protection. So the front of this door that we use for the bodywork class, as you can see, this is the etching primer, and there's basically just one coat of it on here, and it's been sanded a little bit. This is not a high build, meaning it doesn't have a whole lot of thickness to it. It has, easiest way is acids in it that will chemically etch into the metal, and it has sacrificial chromates in it, which means when you scratch it and you expose it to the elements, the metal isn't going to rust next to it like it typically will if you just had a bare piece of metal. Or if you, well, for a good example would be something that's powder coated. If you get your lawnmower deck is typically powder coated, and then you probably realize once you get a scratch or chip in it or something, yes, the powder coat is super hard, but there's none of that underneath it, and it starts to rust like crazy. It gets underneath there and it starts flaking. It's crazy. If you get a scratch on your car, your new car, it's like you'll go years without it ever really rusting. It may get a little surface rust there, but you're not gonna have really a big, huge blister on a scratch, unless it's really down low and it's covered in salt all the time. But just let's say a scratch on the top of the hood or something like that. That's what that's for. It's that corrosion protection, it's adhesion, and that's what you would apply first on your bare metal. So now we can get into that a little bit. Not all of them, but the one that we use here, which is made by PPG, it's an epoxy primer. So it's not only is it an etching primer, but you can also use it as a sealer right before paint. So once the panel's sanded like this, and you go to paint it, when you sand your primer surfacer, you'll often sand through in a spot like that. So the reason you would put down a sealer first is for two reasons. One, when you sand it, you'll often sand through and you'll get some bare metal on an edge. When you put a coat of that down, you're getting that corrosion protection of that bare metal. And the other thing it's going to do is give you a uniform surface. So when you put your paint on, sometimes your paint, your color, be it base coat or a single stage, we'll get into that, is going to be a bit transparent. So when you put that first coat on, and which we're going to do right over this, when we put that first coat on, you're going to see that under that first coat. You put a second coat on, you're going to see it a little bit less, and so forth and so on. So if the panel's all one color to start with, it makes hiding much easier. So instead of putting 5 coats of color on, you only really need to put 2, 3, whatever, maybe.
So quick question. So
Yes.
you start with a primer,
Right.
and then you go with the sealer, the etching primer or whatever.
No. They're both kind of the sealer that we use. Well, I can't say that because we do have a different kind of sealer as well. The etching primer and what we often use as a sealer are the same product.
Gotcha.
They can be used that way to design it. What we end up doing is when we use it as a sealer, we actually just thin it out a little bit more, so it lays smoother. When we spray these panels, it has just a splasher reducer in it, and it comes out orange peel. It comes out with a texture. So when we do a panel for paint, we put a little more reducer in it. We're using a gun with a smaller tip in it, so it atomizes it better, and that's what you use as a sealer. So after the etch prime, we use the primer surface. So that's what we do is a primer surface.
Sean,
So,
question on
yes.
the etch primer. So in a lot of cases, you've got to mix the bare metal and body filler.
Yep.
The etch, the acid etch primer, okay over the body filler?
It's fine over the body filler. Yep. Yep. It's when we get done doing a panel and everything, there's a mix of body filler and bare metal and whatever. You can put it over the whole panel. Yeah. It can also go over, say if you're doing a repair on a fender or something and you've got some existing paint on there, you can put it over that. It typically can go over just about anything.
Aluminum different?
It can go over aluminum.
Yes. Okay.
This particular brand, the only one that can't go over aluminum is they make it different colors. The only one that can't go over aluminum is white, and I don't remember why. Something about the chemical makeup of it that they don't recommend the white over aluminum, but all the rest of the colors you can. And it works really well, and it really bites into that.
For those of us primitive folks that don't have the spray booth, often end up buying the Eastwood 2-part push the button
Yeah.
bottom primer.
Yeah, those are great. Those are actually, we don't use them here for obvious reasons.
Understand why.
But it is a better product. There is a lot of stuff available in spray cans now that works pretty well. Even the Rust-Oleums and stuff, the technologies come a ways where they actually work pretty well. And those 2 parts where you press a button and it mixes and does all that.
The turbo can change the life of everybody that wants to paint their backyard.
Oh, yeah, those,
yeah.
The fan is like
yeah,
this big.
it's a can like this big and it empties in like
8
1.2
seconds.
seconds.
Roughly a couple $100, but to get the job.
Yeah,
done.
right, yeah. And just remember, this is a spray can, not a spray can. So you can get the job done.
Oh, there you go, right? I did it.
Rattle can, not rattle can. That's for you.
I did do it, and then it ended up coming here to get fixed.
It's a private joke between them two.
I tried.
Yeah.
Sean,
So,
when,
yes.
when you say I'm working on the truck,
Yep.
and I get down, I get all the rust off,
Mhm.
I break through, I fix the repairs, weld, whatever. When it's bare metal,
Mhm.
I always have to put something on before I put body filler, correct?
No.
Okay.
You can put body filler 90% of the time. Most of the modern body fillers are designed to go over bare metal.
Okay,
So you can put it over bare metal, that's fine.
but years ago, you never did that. Or you did and you got
could,
problems.
you could, they weren't designed specifically to go over bare metal. Most of them worked fine. There was a handful that didn't. I don't even think they exist anymore, kind of a thing. But for ultimate corrosion protection, yes, you would put an etch prime down first.
Yeah.
If you're doing a small repair, it doesn't really matter. And in fact, here we don't put an etching prime down necessarily before we put body filler on. A lot of times there already is some there, and we'll go over it, but you don't necessarily. And this etching prime, even though we have the mixed versions here, they do make it in spray cans. So self-etching primer. Again, this has no build to it. It's strictly adhesion purposes, and that's about it.
I think I asked you this before. You can mix primer and paint, different brands.
Yes.
Doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, as long as you use the right product.
Most of the time, they're all compatible. Years ago, there was a lot more of
There's some in the lobby.
incompatibility.
Yes.
And it was basically when we had lacquers and enamels. And if you tried to put a lacquer product, what would go down first? The second would be your primer surfacer. And again, for those of you who weren't in the body work class, your primer surfacer is meant to be sanded. The etch primer is not. That is the easiest way to think of that. The etch primer is thin, your primer surfacer is thick. And that gets put on in multiple coats. Your etch primer is typically 1 medium to wet coat. Your primer surfacer is 3-4 heavy coats. And that's meant to be sanded. So once that's on and it's dried and so forth, that's when you'll go ahead and sand it. And we covered that kind of in the bodywork class about using sanding blocks and blocking it certain ways and how to get things straight. So I'm not going to go into that. However, if you're not, if you've already done that and you've reapplied your primer surfacer, okay, that's where, yes, you can take that sanding block again and use the finer grit sandpapers and sand your final prime if you've reprimed it, or your first if you're not planning on priming it. The primer surfacers, they really vary, and there's a million different kinds out there. So most of the ones that you can get at your local parts stores are urethane based, and they're fine for what your average person's going to do. You can buy this brand Transtar. They make one, I can't remember what theirs is called. Yeah, there's a number of them out there. They vary in quality. I would say none of them are bad per se. The only difference with them is some sand a lot easier than others. And the longer they sit, the harder they'll sand. But with that being said, the longer you let them sit, the more they're gonna shrink and dry, and the better end result you'll get for paint. So what will end up happening is when you go to sand it, and if it's really hard, you're gonna wanna use a coarser grit than you probably would if it was really fresh. So that stuff is primer since last month when we did the body class. And that's an aftermarket primer. I think it's made by the Transtar brand. So I sanded that a few hours ago. It was basically concrete. So when you finish sand something, typically before paint, you would finish sand something with, let's say, 320, 400, maybe even 600 grit. I actually started sanding that with 180, just to knock it down real quick, because it had the orange peel, and if those of you here, I had the 1 coat, 2 coat, 3 coat panels in there, so you can see it sanded through. You can almost see a line right here, so that was that first coat. And it was really orange peeled, I think, if you can remember in here. So I took that 180 because I didn't want to waste much time, and I sanded it really fast to get that peel out. And then once it was 90% sanded, I switched to 220, which typically is still pretty coarse for a final paint. But if the primer's really hard, 220 isn't, especially if you're going to put a coat of sealer down. And when we spray a little bit later on, we're not going to seal this panel, so you can see why we would seal it. And you can also see when I finished sanding it, this corner here I left in the 180. So when we put that first coat of base coat on it, you'll actually hopefully be able to see some of those 180 scratches. And then the rest of this is 220, and you'll probably see on that first coat, you may see a few scratches, but you probably won't see them on the second coat. And then this little section up here, I sanded with 400. So on that very first coat, you'll see a difference between this, and this. So that's kind of why I did that panel that way.
One last question. about
Yeah.
primer. Back in the Stone Ages of the 80s, when I used to work in a body shop, we'd get a new panel from the dealer.
Yes.
First thing we do is take that primer and sand it all off.
Yes. Yep.
What is it in 2026?
In 2026, in collision shops that are up to speed and are interested in going fast, that black primer that those fenders come in, don't even sand them.
Wow.
Nope, you wipe them down with a pre-paint cleaner like this.
Wax and grease remover?
This particular product, when I went to school for PPG, the teacher was adamant. He stopped us and said, "Listen to me. If you have a panel and it's an OEM panel," he didn't recommend it with aftermarket panels. It was an OEM replacement panel. I've done it with aftermarket panels and they're fine. He said, "Do not sand the panel. Wipe
Don't
it
even
clean.
start fresh.
Wipe it clean, and you mix this up, and this will stick to E-coat, electrostatic
Okay. Yeah,
coating.
yeah. Which is what that.
Yep. This will stick to that coating without having to sand it at all." And I'm like, right, yeah. Against everything that we learned in the 80s, right? So I did it. I did it on one of my own, the underside of the hood to my Toyota pickup, and it was an aftermarket hood. And I'm like, it's my truck, and it's a hood. It's 4 bolts. If it peels, I'll take it off and repaint it. I want to see how this works. And I did it, and it stuck. And I still have the truck today. It's since repainted it, but it sticks. I've tested it. I've gone back and tried to chip it off. So if Ernie isn't doing that, tell him he's wasting time.
Yes. We
It
are
is
wasting time.
It's something, I've done it, it works. So
I got something to take back.
You got something to bring back. So what do you guys use for paint over there? Do you know?
We're using PPG system. We're using a wet bed. I'm not sure exactly.
It's PPG. So is it their new one? And the exception to that though is if it's an aftermarket panel, and not OEM, I can tell now by just looking at the panel whether I need to sand it or not. I can tell by the type of coating that's on it. There's some aftermarket panels, typically more like patch panels and stuff, that it's not a very good electrostatic coating, and you can actually start sanding it, and if you're sanding it and it's almost like flaking off a little bit, it's not feathering, strip it. If you sand a corner of it and it's like concrete and it's like, then go to town, don't just spray it. Any other questions about Etch Prime or primer surfacer for that matter?
Do we use polyester? Is that what that white is?
This is that Transtar stuff. I think this actually is polyester. I think this is.
I love that.
Yeah. A lot of the primers now, like I said, urethane was the type of chemical or the product that the primers were, the primer surfacers. Excuse me. We in the shop now use a polyester base. And the easiest way to describe that is sprayable Bondo. It's got the same chemical makeup as Bondo, body filler. Good stuff.
That's great
In
stuff.
fact, you can literally swap the hardeners if you had to. It's the same hardener. This one's blue, cream, comes in a tube, and the other one's liquid. So yeah, the easiest way to describe it is that it's sprayable body filler. And there are a lot of primer surfacers now that they'll claim them to be DTM, which means direct to metal. So they will stick to bare metal. They have that corrosion property already built into them. They have that etching property already built into them. A lot of collision shops.
So it's a one-step basically.
It's a one-step. You know, in a body shop,
Sure.
collision shop, they repair a dent.
Yep.
You know, they fix the dent. It's all paint over here, but there's a big thing of bare metal here.
Sure.
It used to be you mixed up a little bit of etch prime over that bare metal, and then you came back in with your primer surfacer, and you put that over it. Now it's just one shot.
One stop.
Yeah. So,
In the custom world, like your world, you don't do that probably.
we don't.
Right.
No. Even when we were using a direct to metal primer before,
Yep.
we would still put down the epoxy primer
Yep.
first. And we touched on this a little bit with the. So yeah, I got a little bit on sanding. Any questions really on sanding? I won't go into techniques and stuff because that's kind of.
He's got to practice that edge.
Right, exactly. Yeah. I'll just touch on what it was just said a little bit. When you do sand something for paint, it's kind of the same process of when you're sanding your body work. If you use a long block, you're going to get a better, straighter result. You still want to do that same thing. So say my hand is the sanding block, you want to do it in an X pattern. So you would go like that, and then you would go like that, and that's going to give you that straightness. And another thing about the primer surfacer, because the primer surfacer is so thick, so say when I primed this, I did a coat, and another coat, and another coat. There's a fan pattern to the spray gun, but it's always, especially if the product's really thick, it's always going to be a little heavier in the center. So even though you're making a swath like this, it's going to be a little heavier in there. So if you didn't sand this and you painted it, you're going to see it's going to have lines. So that's why it is important to block your primer before you actually go to paint. So that first cut, say it's been primed relatively soon, so it is pretty soft, you would take that 220, maybe you would start with, versus the 180 that I used on this today, and you would use that on a block. And then, okay, once it's blocked and you got it sanded about 90%, 80% of the way, then you can switch over to your mechanical sander or a soft pad instead of a hard block with your final 320 or 400. And then you've already made it flat, you've already made it pretty much smooth with that other block. So the blocking part isn't, now you're just getting rid of those 220 scratches is all you're really doing with that final part. But it's fine to start off with a coarser grit, and then what we showed in the other class is if you sand this with the 220 and you're gonna follow it up with another grit, you can put that guide coat on it, which is just that mist of black primer in the spray can or the powder. You like the powder stuff, and that way when you look at it, when you have your glasses on, you'll be able to see if you've got all the scratches out.
So your final grit before the sealer is what, 320, 400?
It depends how hard the primer is.
Okay.
The primer that we're using on a daily basis here, which is that 2-part polyester, is pretty hard. So we definitely start for our final primer. We definitely start with 220. Typically, I might cut it with 180 real quick, just to knock that real top off, and then I'll follow it up with 220, and then 320 is usually as fine as I'll go with that particular primer. I actually painted over the 220 scratches of that, and not had any of them show.
So 80 grits out of the question.
For you,
That's why I had
anything's
lines.
possible. Let's see. Primer, sealers. Okay, so say we've done all that and we've got it sanded and we're ready to start spraying something. Next would be sealer. So same thing, you can come back in if you're using a product like this. And there are some guidelines for that as far as how it's made. This is like a 2-to-1, so 2 parts primer to 1 part of the catalyst. And I put, it's hard to say, like a half a part in a reducer when I'm just putting it on as an etch and prime. When I'm using it as a sealer, it's almost like a 2-to-1 on it, which they don't really list in the tech sheet because that's not VOC compliant for government regulations. But we do it anyway. So that's that particular product. They do have some that are strictly a sealer, which means it doesn't have corrosion protection to it. It's strictly meant to give you a solid, uniform color on the panel and to fill any sand scratches that maybe you might have missed, etc. And those typically come in not necessarily different colors. They'll come in white and black, but you can mix them together to get different shades of gray. And in a body shop, collision, whatever, most of your paint formulas will have an info on there for what they call a grayscale. And the easiest way to describe it, where they're recommending putting down a ground coat sealer that will help that color hide. And the easiest way to describe it is if you took a picture of that blue car, they obviously don't make blue sealer, and you turn it black and white, whatever that shade of gray is when you turn it black and white is what the gray you would want to use under that blue. That's cool. So it makes a lot of sense. It is true.
Now, the idea with the sealer is you're not touching that. You're not sanding that sealer, are you?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep, the sealer typically does not get sanded.
Lays pretty flat.
Little
uphill.
trade secret. To get something really flat, the sealer will give you peel. No matter how much you reduce it, how well you spray it. Most of your orange peel on a paint job comes from the sealer. the sealer doesn't sand. It's gummy, it's be it the one that's strictly a sealer or the epoxy. This epoxy does not sand. It will, if it sits for weeks, it becomes a lot more sandable. But I think when we did the class there and I hit it with a sand
Yeah.
real quick, you can see it build. It's sanded. It did its purpose to find low spots and stuff, but it gums up the paper. It just doesn't sand well. The same thing with the strictly sealer. That does not sand. It stays gummy. Years ago, there was they had products that were a single component, meaning it took no catalyst or a lacquer-based sealer. And you use those, spray those. When those dried, yes, you could sand them a little bit. They weren't gummy, but they don't really make them anymore. You don't sand the sealer. If you got a big chunk of something in there, like a fly landed in it or whatever, if you let it dry for a good half hour, 45 minutes, yes, you can go in with a fine grit and you can kind of get that dust nib off. What I do when I'm painting a car for real, we'll say, I put my sealer down. If there's a big nib, yes, maybe I'll hit that. If there's a dust nib in there that I see, I may not sand it right then and there. I'll put on 2 coats of base coat, and then I'll come in and sand that base coat. The base coat doesn't sand well either, but it sands a whole lot easier than the sealer. And when you sand that base coat, just like you do your final coat, and that I'll sand with 800, really fine. When you start sanding that base coat, you'll see that peel underneath there, and that peel is typically the sealer. And if you sand through that base coat, you'll actually see that peel come through in that sealer. So you get that base coat nice and smooth, and then put a subsequent coat of base coat over that. So when you put your clear on, it lays out.
Using your base coat as a filler.
A little bit, yeah, a little bit. And like say, if you have something in your sealer, when you put that base coat on, because the base coat sands easier, so when you sand that spot, you can see that nub still sticking through it. It sands easy because it's surrounded by the base coat.
So the orange peel only always comes from the base coat or the sealer, not the clear.
No, it can come from
It can,
yeah. It can come from everything.
Oh, it comes everywhere.
Yeah, it
When I-
comes
when I
everywhere.
paint, it comes from
Yep.
everywhere.
Yep. It's just, yeah. Years of experimenting and experience that kind of shows you.
My wife tells me it looks like a fruit bowl.
Using a different spray head on the sealer that you're using on base coat.
No.
No.
Typically the same fluid tip. Yep. Which I'll cover in a minute. Yeah. So that's kind of the skinny on the sealers. Any real questions there?
I have a silly question. So, like, when would you do like wet sanding? Because I've definitely seen people do that, but I don't know what stage that is.
Good question. Wet sanding. A lot of people still do it. A lot of shops still do it. In this shop, it's gone.
No?
No? Okay.
Yep. Some of my guys still like to do it, and I let them do it. Keep their pride. When I was selling automotive products, we used to do seminars where we'd have paint reps, sandpaper reps, and everything come in and show us the latest and greatest products. And right before I left doing that and opened up the shop, 3M came in and they had this new line of sandpapers called Trizac, and they were the latest and greatest. The paper, which I could get one. This is for. The paper was weird. It wasn't like what you would think about as sandpaper that you get at the hardware store, and you get it wet and it's paper and it falls apart and whatever. This paper was almost like, easiest way to describe it would be almost like wax paper, with grit on one side of it. And the whole thing, the Trizac thing, it's the shape of the grit, the actual sand on the sandpaper, and how sharp it was and so forth and so on, and this type of paper. And the whole reason for wet sanding was always that the paper, as soon as you started sanding something, the paper would load up. And you'd start sanding, and all of a sudden the paper's full of your primer or whatever it is, and you would have to throw it away and get another piece. So if you used it wet, it did two things. It made it cut a lot easier because the water worked as a lubricant, but it also kept it from loading up. So you would take that piece of paper, you would block sand the panel a little bit, and it would start to load up a little bit, but you would get much further than if it was dry, and then you just put that piece of paper in the bucket again, and then you rinse it out and just keep on going. So instead of taking 10 pieces of paper to sand that panel, you were using 1, 2, maybe. This is how it was.
Now they have sponges.
They have sponges and stuff now too. So when 3M came up with this Trizact stuff, whatever it was, the combination of the paper and the type of grit that they were using on it, it just doesn't load up. It doesn't load up like it used to. And you can sand something and it loads up, but if you hit it on your pants or whatever, or take a piece of Scotch-Brite and just go like that, it unclogs instantly, and you can just keep on going. So when you wet sand, it's a mess.
Yeah.
Your hands are pickled,
Yep.
and there's white sludge everywhere.
Yep.
That white sludge runs down in the gaps in the panels, and it's a pain in the ass to get out after it's dried, and it makes a mess. There are some advantages to it, but they're heavily outweighed now by this new products that you can just use dry and sweep it up.
Makes sense.
So you do sand after your paint, typically?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, but
Yep.
you don't wet sand it?
No, don't. Again, some of the guys do. Some they'll do it because they just. There are some advantages, like you have a little bit more control.
Sure.
You can make things a little flatter. But again, I've experimented with the different grits and
Sure.
processes, and I personally don't do anything wet anymore at all.
Your dry sanding clear.
Dry sanding clear. Yep. Yep. There is an exception to that, and I'll touch on that later.
And in the 70s, that's what they would have me do, wet sand.
Wet sand. Yep.
You know,
It
people
was
building
that way.
hot
That
rods.
was that way right through the 90s.
Oh,
Emery
okay.
cloth, they call it.
What's that?
Emery cloth.
Yeah, there was emery cloth.
Too wet, you jump in.
Yep. Which was just that. It was more cloth than paper.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So, good. All right. So we've covered the sealers, paint, and different types of paint. We could spend all day on that. To make it quick, anyone who's been around painting for a long time, and I mentioned earlier, lacquers and enamels, they're gone. Lacquer, you can still get lacquer through like specialty places. It's kind of pointless. It was kind of great for back in the day. Enamels came along, and those were really pretty good, especially once acrylic enamels came out versus the alkyd enamels. Acrylic enamels used a catalyst, so they would actually cure and be chemical resistant, and UV resistant, and all that kind of stuff. Those are pretty much long gone. Everything now is either solvent based, which would typically be urethane. Although the base coat that we use here is technically polyester, but it uses urethane reducer, so it's urethane. And then collision shops, most of the collision shops now, the base coat is waterborne. And there's two reasons for that. Waterborne is being pushed for VOC regulations. So solvents obviously aren't great for the environment. Water is water. And the other reason all the shops are switching to waterborne, whether they're required to or not, it's like California, you have to spray waterborne, and I think Massachusetts now is strictly waterborne, probably Connecticut. all the new cars, when you get new cars, the base coat on your new car is waterborne base coat, and they're all urethane clears still. But color match the way the pearls are made, the way they suspend in that waterborne paint, matching them with solvent. It can be done, it's just a lot more tricky out of the gate if you're using a waterborne base coat. It's gonna match your new cars much better. Still can match them with solvent. There's still formulas for it, and the solvent isn't really going away anytime soon. But the waterborne is a much better match. Obviously here, we don't paint anything new. There's no reason for us to switch to waterborne. The waterborne is very slow drying. A lot of new booths have special fans in the corner. They have ceiling fans, just like your dining room, and fans up there. There's fans everywhere, so once you spray that base coat, they try to get that airflow to dry them. So it takes an hour to spray the base coat and let it dry and do all the things, where this, you can spray 3 coats of that in 15, 20 minutes. And by the time you clean your gun out, mixed up your clear, it's ready to go. It's a lot easier. For paints today, if you were to go and get something, you're either going to get a urethane, let's say, base coat, or there's still single stage. And the way to describe the single stage is like your acrylic enamel, meaning there's no clear coat that goes on it. The base coat is more like your lacquer. Back in the day, the metallics and stuff, you would spray lacquer and then you would actually spray a clear over those. So now base coat is strictly pretty much all your metallics. Any metallic color you would use a base coat. We still do single stage, meaning it doesn't require a clear coat for solid colors only. So black, white, red, Nash yellow. The easiest way to describe that product, and what I've told people when they come in is, I want a black paint job and I want a clear coat, and I'm like, no, you don't. And the single stage is the same chemical makeup as clear coat, uses the same hardener. It's just clear coat with pigment in it. And why don't you do that with metallic colors? Well, the reason for that is that clear coat, it stays wet for a while, and those metallics are suspended in that. And if it stays really wet for a while, those metallics settle, and you get all these stripes in the metallic. The metallics don't work in a single stage very well. They used to in the acrylic enamels, but it was just the characteristics of the enamels that you could spray your panel and you wait just like a minute or two, and then you would come back and you would just fog it a little bit, and that would let the metallics, a new set of metallics, sit on top, and you could get away with it. The urethanes, because urethanes, you spray them basically the way you want them to look. They don't move afterwards. The enamel, you would spray it, it would be really orange peely, and you'd come back in 10 minutes and it would smooth out. So it's just a whole different thing. So anything metallic, it's base coat, clear coat. But again, black and some of those solid colors, I find it's easier to do them in single stage. It's less steps, slightly less money, but the biggest point to them is they're actually really easy to touch up afterwards. So the way to think about it is, say if you have black base clear, so you have your black base coat, and then you have your clear on top of it, and you get a scratch. And that scratch is like this into that clear, and yet you can put some black in there, and then you fill it with clear, but that black is coming up here, so when you look at it, you can always see the edge. Versus if there's pigment all the way through it, and you fill it with more stuff with pigment in it, and you can sand it and buff it, they tend to, you can still see it, but they blend much easier. It's just a little trick that seems to work really well. And as far as durability and UV protection, they last just as well. So that's the big difference between a single stage and a base clear. Base coats, like again, there's a million different brands of base out there. I won't go into them. They're all very similar. They're all mixed, kind of the same. They all more or less sprayed the same, and they all need to be clear coated. The thing about base coats and why they work with metallics is when you see when we'll spray a little bit of it, when that you put a coat of base coat on, it dries in 2 or 3 minutes, and when it dries, it's flat. It's got no shine to it. So it's that same thing. They don't stay wet, so those metallics don't have a chance to move. When they land, they stay there, and that's that. So that's why base coats work well for metallics. Clear coats, there's a million clear coats, like there is a million primers. There's different degrees of quality, speed, shine. This is one that I've been spraying for quite a while. It's an aftermarket clear, meaning it's not PPG, it's not a name brand. This is, I don't even know what we paid for this. This is probably $200 right here. If this was PPG or the name brand of like the base coat, this would be $700. And that's just to clear. You need hardener to go with it. So this is like 200. This is probably 100. If it's name brand, this is going to be 700, and this is going to be 250, 300 bucks. It would be like $1,000 for just one set.
And the quality's the same. In your
Yes and no. For a long time, the aftermarket clears, kind of like aftermarket panels and the primers they were putting on them. Aftermarket clears in the late 80s, 90s, they weren't nearly as good as the name brand stuff. But technology's come a long way. The aftermarket stuff, in my opinion, works just as well as the name brand stuff, especially on a classic car. The one thing that still happens every now and again with cheaper aftermarket clears is UV protection. So you've probably seen a car that's somewhat older and the top's all white. That's because it was cheap clear, the sun beat on it, it didn't have UV protection, and it kind of just failed. But that's something that sits in the sun all day long, whatever. So like, this is $200, you can get some aftermarket clear that's $100. That's not gonna typically hold up. So this easy way is like a middle of the road kind of clear. And for something that's only sees sun at a car show every weekend, otherwise sits in the garage, it's gonna be fine. I use it on my own cars and even daily driver ones, and they seem to hold up just fine. We still use on higher end jobs, we still will use a higher end clear, just in the event that something happens that we kind of have, even though we're not a certified shop and whatever, we still have a little more of a leg to stand on. It's like, hey, we used your products start to finish and it failed, and they were like, yep, it did, and we'll cover the cost of the materials and whatever. I did have some paint failures years ago. Some PPG would be used in a collision shop. So kind of a different animal than this one. This one's really fast. Often, this particular one shines really good after it's baked. Some of the really fast clears don't shine as well after they've dried. just because of the nature of them drying so fast. Some of that solvent is trapped and it loses some of its gloss. But this is great for when you're painting a fender. This is great if you're painting something at home and you don't have a booth. This stuff with the right hardener, you can spray this and you can buff that air dry in 2.5 hours.
Oh, wow.
That's how fast it dries. So it's got its place. So like in a collision shop
Sure.
or a backyard shop that doesn't have a spray booth and they're just trying to pump out, rust repair or fenders, a great product. We use it pretty sparingly. It's just when we need to, yeah, we need to, the brackets to hold the fender on,
Sure.
any body color, and it's like, yeah, we're not gonna wait an hour and a half, dry time to, we use that to paint, to clear brackets and small stuff like that. Motorcycles, when we paint motorcycle tanks and
Yeah.
different stuff like that.
Yeah.
Works great for that. Fenders, anything small, you don't wanna do an overall on it, because by the time you go down the side of a car and you go back to it, it's already dry. It's already flat. So that's kind of the skinny on clears. Oh yes, PPE, personal protective equipment. Just like it's always been, this stuff's nasty, you don't want to breathe it. You don't want to get it on your hands like this. You absorb it through the skin. It will cause cancer, it will do all that fun stuff. It will actually irritate you. I know some people that actually have allergies to it. Even sanding some of it will bother them sometimes. It is pretty, all this stuff is pretty nasty. Try to wear rubber gloves, just regular disposable rubber gloves. And then they have actual paint respirators. Sanding, you can typically get away with it like a dust mask. These respirators have chargeable canisters in them. They even make some stuff that we use in the booth here, which is supplied air. So the airline hooks up to it, it's a full hood, it's pumping fresh air through a filter. Those work really well. So just be conscious of what you don't want to go bathing in it. I've been pretty good my whole life about trying to wear some of this stuff. I'm still exposed. Luckily, I'm still here. Yeah, so there's that. When we do some spraying, I do have just some regular masks here. These will work fine for just keeping the bulk of it out of you. I've also had the booth adjusted so that it's sucking out more than it's putting in. So you'll see when I'll do some demonstration with spraying, it sucks it out really, really fast. This will just basically keep it from blowing back in your face and just getting really hit and then keep you from having black boogers. Prepping the panels. We've sanded it, we've done all that. The next thing you want to do before you paint is wash it. So, anyone know what fish eyes are in paint? All that fun stuff. That's contaminants, grease, silicone is the biggest one, Armor all that stuff will create complete havoc. So if you're trying to repair a fender on something, on a classic car, and it's fresh from the car show and he's got all kinds of Armor all in those tires, you're screwed. You gotta wash all that off before it even comes in the building. Yeah, silicone's the worst one, but there's polymers, waxes, all that stuff. So they make this pre-paint cleaner. And there's a bunch of different ones out there. We get it by the gallon like this. They do have some that come in aerosol cans. Those work well. And in a pinch, worst case, glass cleaner. Glass cleaner works. It will do the job. The other thing about glass cleaner that's actually really good, and they do make, this is solvent based, but they do make waterborne ones. If you wipe panel down, especially if it's fiberglass or plastic, if you wipe it with solvent, it will create a ton of static electricity, and you'll get a ton of dust. If you wipe it with water-based, it will not create static. So it's kind of interesting. So we have sprayers here that we just kind of spray the panel down. You won't have that unless you get some in a spray can, obviously. So we used to always just kind of pour some on a rag. I should probably show you the proper way to do this versus the quick and easy one. We use in there. We actually have some that are completely lint-free that we pay a lot of money for. We use those before actual paint. These we use before primer because we're not really concerned about as much lint. But you wet a panel or wet a rag, you wipe the panel, and then you dry it, but you're not necessarily drying it per se. You're removing the contaminants on this piece that you softened with this. So the wetter you get it, the better it will be. Once this is done, try not to touch it with your bare hands. Your oil from your fingers and stuff, those can create fish eyes, contaminants, all that sort of stuff.
Sean, they don't use tack cloth anymore?
Yes, you do.
Oh, you still do?
Yep,
Oh.
so you would do this before paint,
Yep.
and then you can see the contaminants that came
Yeah.
off. This is just dust, basically.
Sure.
But even though I wiped it with this, when I went back over it, you can see that there's this. There's a bunch of different kinds of these. Some are slower evaporating than others. The slower it evaporates, the easier it's going to clean. But you don't want that to be on there when you go to paint. So typically, right before paint, you use the faster ones when it's evaporated.
Can you use denatured alcohol?
You can, actually, yeah. Some of the waterborne ones I was talking about actually will have alcohol in them, and then some of them are basically, that's what it is, isopropyl alcohol.
Yeah.
Is what a lot of the waterborne ones are. I have seen, not so much lately with the newer products, but alcohol for whatever reason will actually soften some of the older primer surfaces. I haven't seen it that much lately. The polyesters, I haven't seen it touch the polyesters. The urethane ones, I would see it soften, and it would be like a thing I'd wipe with the alcohol, and I'm like, where'd my sand scratches go? And it would be like, it would make the primer shiny again, and I'm looking at it, and it would soften it just enough that it was getting rid of those sand scratches. We thought that was one of the problems when we were having those paints made. So that's basically washed, and then yes, at the end you would take a tack cloth. If anyone's done woodworking or anything, it's this cheesecloth that's sticky, and then you end up running this over the panel. This gets rid of, sometimes you'll see the streaks from washing. A lot of times if you go back over it, this will even get rid of some of those little streaks. But it gets rid of any dust that might have landed on the panel. It also gets rid of any lint that these might have left behind. And then no matter how clean your booth is, when you go to spray, you're still gonna get dust. And if you don't clean the booth and it's a mess and you don't care and you go in and paint it, there won't be a single dust nib in it. Why that is, I don't know. I've cleaned the booth upside down, every which way, gone in, thinking this is gonna be the cleanest paint job I've ever done, and it's full of dust. And then I go and paint a motorcycle fender and a tank in here, and I don't sweep the floor, I don't do anything, I just walk in, and it comes out perfect. No rhyme or reason for it. Any painter will tell you that too. Ernie will verify that.
Can attest.
Yeah. Prepping paint guns. Okay, we'll bang through this real quick. Spray guns. There's a million of them, a million different brands. They come in all kinds of different colors, shapes, sizes, whatever. Years ago, they were used to have the big can on them like this. They were called the siphon feed. So when the air came out, it would suck the paint up. I don't even know if you can buy those anymore. Maybe at Harbor Freight for $39.95.
I'm pretty sure they're at Harbor
Yeah.
Freight.
Hey, they worked great. My first spray guns were those. I painted a lot of cars with them. They came out great. Then they came up with gravity feed, which this is. So the cup on this sits up top, so you don't have that siphon, which enables you to spray at lower pressure because you're not having to suck the paint up. It's naturally coming down. And then they came out with even further with ones that are called HVLP, high volume, low pressure, and it's just the easiest way to describe it. It's the design of this is called the air cap. It's the holes around it that you can spray at even lower pressure and you still get that ton of paint. It still atomizes it. You don't get as much of a cloud. Most of the guns that we spray here are that. They're high volume, low pressure guns. However, in Massachusetts and California, you have to use HVLP. Here, you can get ones that they sell now that are RP, regular pressure. I use one of those for my clear coat. It still doesn't create the big cloud like the old siphon feed stuff, but it puts out a whole lot more material and you can move a whole lot faster. So the HVLP guns are cool, but you're like this.
What pressure are you
The RP you're moving. You can and they atomize and look as good as these. Pressure wise, the HVLPs they're like I think they're like 30 psi in, and that's 10 to 12 psi at the cap. There's like this whole thing about them, but that's typically what it is. Pressure and all that stuff. There's a lot of like just technique with that. You could have 3 different painters. They all use the same exact gun. They're all going to spray at different pressures. It's all how fast you move, what you end up getting comfortable with. It depends on you're spraying this at a higher pressure than you are this because this is thicker. There's a million different variables. I could spend all day on all those. But the big thing is the HVLP siphon feed, but also if you go to buy a gun, it will be your fluid tip size. So what that means is how big this little hole is here. So this is a 1.3 gun, 1.3 millimeters. That's how big that hole is there. Most base coat sealer, you can spray with a 1.3 or a 1.4. Sometimes sealers, people like to go slightly bigger because it's a little thicker product. They'll go with a 1.4. If you had a 1.4, that would do pretty much everything you need. You can do your clear with it. They do make some guns that come with different tips. So you'll have one gun and it's got a 1.3, a 1.6, and a 1.8. Your 1.8, that's what you spray your primer with. The 1.6, maybe that's what you spray your sealer, or if you were to spray some single stage paint, you would use that 1.6. Then 1.3 or 1.4 is your base coat and clears. If you go to see a gun and you see all those things, that's what it means. The smaller the number means the smaller the tip. It's meant to atomize better and spray thinner materials, so to speak. So this
pressure
here
changes like the football, right? Like
Yep.
you get the
There's
spray pattern.
there's a little bit. So there's a bunch of different adjustments on the guns. Pretty much they all have the same kind of adjustments. On this particular gun, this is how much air is going through. So you'll see there isn't a regulator on here. Back in the day, you would have this giant regulator here, and that's how you would adjust your pressure. Most guns now have something here. This particular gun had a regulator built right in, so it was a little digital thing, so you could adjust this and it would tell you what your pressure was. That battery is long since died. After you've been doing it as long as I have, you go, that sounds right, here we go. And the second you start spraying, you're like, that's just the slightest bit too much pressure, and you dial it down. As a beginner, it would be good to have a regulator or something that kind of is like, okay, I know roughly where I'm at. That RP gun that I was talking about earlier, it's the regular pressure. I do have a regulator on that one because that one is very sensitive to the pressure that you're spraying it with. And when you're spraying a car in pieces, you want to make sure that you have that same pressure when you paint the doors as you do the fenders, or they'll come out in different colors. So yeah, most of them have that air pressure. This one here, you turn this in, and this is your fluid. So all the way out, you can see the trigger goes all the way back. So this is basically just a stop for your trigger. So as you turn this in, you can see the trigger moving out. So as you turn this in, the trigger is going that way. It's a stop. So say even though you've got all you have is a 1.6 or 1.4, you can say choke it up. So you're not, when you pull the trigger completely, it's not putting out all the material. A good thing to practice with when you're new. At this point, I leave mine all the way out, and I've learned to just be able to throttle it with my fingers and be like, you want to be full blast when you're going across the panel. And when you come in and you need to just dust a little in a door jamb or something, you learn to just kind of feather it. This is your fan pattern. So this one here is just that. Cranked out all the way that way, it's like this. You turn it all the way this way and it's round. When it's round like that, it's porking a bunch of material on, so be careful. When you want to do that is when you're painting inside a frame, or you need to get some paint somewhere where you just really can't get the gun up in there. If you turn it into that round pattern and you're careful with it, you can shoot paint a long ways, get it up into an area where you just can't when it's a fan pattern. So that's what that's about. And all the guns now, they're 2 stages, and when we spray here in a minute, you'll see that. So 2 stages is 2 things. When you pull the trigger, it's going to go to a certain point, and you're going to feel a stop. All that's doing is letting air out. When you go past that stop, that's when it's pulling that needle back and letting material out. So it's a 2-step thing, and again, you pull the trigger, we just air, and then it's fluid. The reason for that is if you pull the trigger and it's fluid right away, you'll get a run. It's going to just blast a bunch of paint on there. So you always start with the trigger pulled a little bit, and then when you pull the trigger into the paint, there's already the air there, and it's already going to start to atomize it. And the other thing is always have the gun moving when you start pulling the trigger for paint. So you want to make sure you're moving when you start releasing the paint. If you here start releasing the paint and then go, it's going to put a bunch there no matter how quick you are. It's again, practice, technique, and I'll show that a little bit more in a second. Any other quick questions about guns? I can go over more later if you want to show you different types of stuff. That's gun selection, spray techniques, and coats applied. That's going to be easiest described when we spray. So, let's fire up the boot. Is that black etching primer. This particular gun, we spray pretty much just primer on them. So the tip in this is a lot bigger than the one in that. That one's from base coat. I believe this is a 1.8 tip that's in this gun. Again, I wouldn't be using this want to use a sealer, I would use that gun. This is for putting it on. We just want to get material on the bare metal. Your overlap. So we're going to have a fan pattern, which you can see here. So you can kind of see when I pull the trigger a little ways, just there. When I pull the trigger a little further, it lets the material out. That is a fan pattern. Can't do it. I can't do this on the freshly painted walls. Look at this. So this is the fan pattern. This is turned out all the way. I'm not sure what this gun's going to look like. So that's the fan pattern. A lot of times when you turn it out all the way, it will actually be heavy out here and a little light right here. So you don't, if you want a fan pattern, depending on the gun, you might not want it adjusted all the way out. So that's all the way out, which is actually pretty even for this particular gun. I'm turning this in now. You can actually often hear it. That's the fan. That's the circle. You can hear it. You can actually see the vapor and it comes out fast when it's like that. And again, if you're spraying up in a trunk and you're just trying to get primer somewhere or inside a frame or something, that's when you do that. You can see it taking off already. You can see how much I just gave it just a second on there. Another thing, if you are spraying like that, the other trick that you do is turn that crushing way down. So I do the same thing. You can see how it put a whole lot less on there that time. So just again, experiment. You'll see what everything kind of does. There's the adjustment. Over this side, we'll do a little bit. When you spray, and this goes for whether it's primer, base coat, clear, anything. Typically when you spray primer, like we were saying, spray pressures, when you're spraying paint, you spray at a higher pressure than you do primer. When you spray primer, you don't want that big cloud that's just waste. You want to get that material onto the panel. So if we were spraying paint, we'd be spraying at say 25 psi or whatever. Primer, it's like 10. You crank it way down and you can kind of hear it a little bit. You want to have enough so it's still atomizing it, but not like you can hear that. See how splattered it is? Turn it up. You can see it more there. Actually, next. You almost see that little bit of a. So whether you're spraying primer, doesn't matter. Typically, each pass you make, you want to overlap it by at least half, if not 2/3. Primer, again, we're just putting a coat of primer on this just to cover the bare metal. We're not sort of a real thickness or anything. And the other part, like I mentioned earlier, you want to make sure you're moving when you pull that fluid trigger. The other thing is, the biggest mistake I see when people start spraying is you don't want to stand here and go like this. You want to keep this gun perpendicular to the panel at all times. So when I'm out here, I'm not like this. I have the gun like this. Painting, it's all the wrist. It literally is, you want to have this gun perpendicular to the panel no matter where you are. Like so, if I'm over here, it's staying the same thing. So it is really all on the wrist. part, if you're painting a whole car, you want to walk as little as possible. So you don't want to do this. You want to stay here. I typically start at the end of the panel or something. I have long arms, so it also helps me with that. You stay overlap by half. Again, I'm keeping the gun the same distance away, which is typically 8 inches, which you can just kind of get it even by going like that. Keeping a smooth, you don't want to speed up, you don't want to slow down, that's going to give you heavy, dry spots. Nice, smooth, hold, way it up. Who's first? No, not like that.
I didn't pull the trigger yet.
I know. Not bad. A little bit. But it's actually okay. It's fine.
Was it
The
too
only-
far apart? Like
No,
that?
your distance was good.
Yeah.
The only thing that you had is at the very end,
Yeah.
you were drifting off just a little bit. Which wouldn't be bad if we were painting the side of a car. So if we were painting the side of a car, you obviously can't go down the side of the car. So you have to do it in sections. So in that case, you keep the gun as straight as you can to the very end, and at the very end, you whip the gun out. So that it doesn't stop, it wisp it out. Then you move on to the next section and you do the same thing when you get to that where you stop, you whip the thing out again. So I can kind of show you a little bit, show you a little on this. So you would actually come across it and go like that. Because if you stop hard, it's going to give you the run. Then when you come over here to do the rest of the car, you spray, and you put back into it. And if you're painting a whole car, and you're putting multiple coats on, one of the things that Anna told me early on, wasn't early, a lot of times people when they paint a car, they'll stop at the end of the door and then pick up from the fender and do the fender, which is fine for your first coat. But often what will happen is you're going to build up the paint on the edge of the fender or the end of the door. First coat is fine. It's kind of like it gives you a good place to figure out where you stop. But next time, your next coat, instead of overlapping here, overlap over here. Wherever you're going to overlap, you're inevitably going to get more paint in that overlap spot. So if you're doing your overlaps in the same spot on each coat, you're going to get a lot of paint in that one area. So wherever your overlap is, try to mix it up. So your first overlap on your first coat is here, your second overlap on your second coat is here, your third overlap is here. That way it's not, you don't consistently get a heavy spot or a dry spot in the same place every coat.
And break the joints.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep. Who wants to try?
Go for it.
That's not good. Nice.
Go for it. Go ahead and hit the hood. Yep. You can start at the bottom. I'll show a little trick after this too, but go ahead. Watch that grip at the end. There you go. Move a little faster. There you go. Yep. That's good.
Nice.
Pretty good job. Again, it's the same thing. I see it all just a little slower. There you go. most of the metallic, I can't see these underneath it. So we know after 4 coats we have high. So when you go to paint the car, you know that that's good. The other thing these things do too is if you know what the color's supposed to look like, and you know after 2 coats that this looks just like the color, then you know, okay, that's more the kind of color sealer that I can go with.
Okay.
That's when you're trying to really match something. And when you're trying to paint a section of a door and match the rest of the door, and you need to put something over that white primer, you want to put some kind of sealer on there that's going to help that color cover quickly, and also make sure that if there's anything showing through that color, that it's the right hue. If that makes sense. So that's where these come in handy too. So, yeah.
Great job.
Questions, comments, concerns? Thank you very much.
Do you teach us this so we know why it costs so much?
What's that?
Do you teach us all this to let us know what kind of work into your projects?
Yes and no. And no, it's really just because a lot of people don't. And we're just scratching the surface.
Right,
Really,
right. My